After a couple days of secular politics dominating the church news cycle, it's good to return to, unfortunately, the normal news cycle for at least this channel, even though I rarely have good news for you and I don't have it today. But it is weird to get back to some normalcy. Well, I will say on the secular politics front, where it intersects with the church, if you go to America Magazine right now or the National Catholic Reporter, you will see that they are in full blown go after the new administration mode. It's all they're talking about right now. It is really odd, almost as if there's a coordinated effort going on around the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C. But that would be weird to suggest that they're coordinating, because why would competing news outlets do that? Food for thought. But let's talk today about the where secular politics always interacts with the church, which is where the values that underlie the secular world right now, values that have been increasingly rejected by people all across the Western world for the last few years. Novus Ordo Watch posted this, and this is how I learned of this address, because I don't actually follow Pope Francis's address to various groups when he makes them all that closely, unless they are like eye-catching. And so we got one like that yesterday. Novus Ordo Watch posted on X. Francis today. Do not forget that since the time of the Garden of Eden, women have been in charge. Women are in charge. Now, I don't know if he's bragging like that's a good thing, because he is bragging that that's a good thing. But kind of the lesson from the Garden of Eden is literally the opposite of it being a good thing. And no, I'm not blaming women for the fall entirely. Adam obviously failed in his duties to his wife. Okay. It's a little more complicated than just the sin of Eve. Though, let's not downplay her role in this either. That's sort of like the danger you get when you start talking about Adam and Eve and the culpability. They were both expelled from the Garden of Eden. They both were culpable for it. But there's some context here, and that is that Francis is here talking about nuns. And that is often the case. Francis promotes error by wrapping his errors in truth. That's how you sell errors. Nobody would follow something, an idea system, that was obviously erroneous. You sell erroneous ideas to people by wrapping it in truth. Look how the followers of Karl Marx throughout history have sold their errors to people. They usually exploit people who are suffering because they have been subject to the consequences of some other bad idea out there, or at least the consequences of people sinfully using the established system for their own personal aggrandizement and leaving a lot of wreckage in their wake. That's how this always works. You wrap error in the truth. And here he is here going to say that nuns and women religious are underappreciated. You can also argue, as he does, that women in society are underappreciated. Though the people who usually say things like that then want to solve the problem of women in the broader culture being underappreciated with a disordered solution that is unchristian and frankly stupid, and usually has horrible consequences when they implement their bad ideas. But errors are most easily sold by wrapping it in some element of truth. And it is obviously true that women religious and nuns are underappreciated in the church. And the biggest offender in that is Pope Francis. All you have to do is go back and watch a few of my videos where I report to you about how he goes out of his way to crush traditional women religious orders. And it's not usually just women religious, but those are usually the ones that make the news. So he himself, who destroys convents, destroys religious orders, is the biggest offender in this himself. So he gave an address recently to a group called the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. Yes, from the Hilton family. Some of their board members were in the Vatican. So again, before the events of 2020, it was like every week there was some secularist, let's build utopia on earth conference happening in Rome. After the events of 2020, which didn't really wrap up until like 2023 in Italy, you find that the Vatican was slow to get these things going in, but they seem to have picked these things back up. And they had their representatives in the Vatican for some reason or another. I'm just going to give you an idea what this organization was. They say that they are a worldwide humanitarian foundation with strategic initiatives driven by our mission and founded in our donors' intent. We aim to improve the lives of individuals living in poverty and experiencing disadvantage throughout the world. Nothing wrong with helping the poor. Jesus commanded us to help the poor. And the church says, yes, you should give money to church organizations that do this, but it's also okay to give money to non-church organizations that do the same work as long as the work they do does not conflict with what the church teaches. That's fine. Here's their mission. We are guided by the intent of our donors, Conrad and Baron Hilton, who gave virtually all of their personal wealth to the foundation and gave its directors a noble, worldwide philanthropic mission. As the funds you will expend have come from many places in the world, Conrad Hilton counseled, so let there be no territorial, religious, or color restrictions on your benefactions. In our workplace and in our collaborative efforts to alleviate human suffering, we apply their values of integrity, thinking big, humility, stewardship, and compassion. And their vision statement is the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation foresees a world in which improving the human condition is a shared and sustainable goal. Love one another, for that is the whole law, Conrad Hilton wrote in the will. The peoples of the world deserve to be loved and encouraged, never to be abandoned to wander alone in poverty and darkness. That is our resolve. So a vision statement is kind of like, this is the goal, our purpose, right? And they're trying to build a better world. They're trying to build utopia on earth. That is their goal. Alleviating poverty, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, Jesus commands us to do that. It's perfectly fine to support groups that do not conflict with what the church says on moral issues to do that work, as long as you're also supporting church organizations. But there's more to this than that, though. So that does give you an idea of what this group is about. It's a secularist organization that is trying to make a better world. Again, utopia on earth, which is why Francis meets with him. He has elevated the desire for a better world into a false gospel. And so I'm going to give you his address in full. It is very short because, well, you may have noticed that Francis lately, when he does speak, he tends to speak in for much shorter lengths of time than he used to. That is a sign about his health. But this was given yesterday at the Vatican. Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome and good morning, and thank you for your visit. I offer a cordial greeting to the board of directors of the Conrad Hilton Foundation. In our time as the numbers of the poor and excluded in our world continue to increase, which is notable, you have chosen to commit yourselves actively to promoting human dignity, personally with passion and compassion like the Good Samaritan. That parable of Jesus exhorts us to identity with the needs of others, to reach out and lift up those who have fallen by the wayside, and in this way to benefit us all. And he cites himself with Fratelli Tutti. Do not forget that only on one occasion, in one moment in time, it is listed to look down on someone in order to help that person to get up. Otherwise, we can never look down on someone, only to help and lift a person up. Do not forget it, always. Your foundation has shown how such generosity and commitment can transform the lives of those who find themselves in situations of vulnerability. The service you freely offer in the fields of education, health, assistance for people fleeing, and the fight against poverty is a concrete testimony of love and compassion. Do not forget this word, compassion, to suffer with. God is compassionate. He draws close and suffers with us. Compassion is not throwing money into the hands of another without looking them in the eyes. No, compassion is drawing close and suffering with. Do not forget the word compassion. As an aside here, again, remember, wrapping error in truth. Nothing he said there is incorrect. Your founder, Conrad Nicholson Hilton, bequeathed you his dream, which continues to inspire the foundation's projects. Among these is one that you will have consistently promoted, that of supporting women religious. Conrad Hilton held religious sisters in high regard. In his will, he asked the foundation to support them in their mission of serving the poorest and the least of our brothers and sisters. Once a former agnostic was telling me about ending up in the hospital. The sisters took care of him, and as a result, he converted. He remarked, what would the church be without the sisters? That is beautiful. You're doing this with fidelity and creativity, especially through your contribution to the formation of younger sisters and the care of the elderly in their congregations. In some countries, the sisters are elderly, but there's no need to send them to a care home. No. I remember one congregation in Argentina that had a sister who was originally from Italy. The provincial arrived and said, no, you have to retire at 70. The sisters passed away because of sadness. The sisters have to work until the end, in as much as possible until the end. And if this does not happen, the other thing happens. We have a sister here who has always worked with the poor. She is old but still drives, and they let her do it. In this way, she still feels useful. Please let the sisters remain with the people. I am aware that you have cooperated with several Vatican dicasteries in order to provide the sisters with opportunities to grow in professionalism and missionary outreach. Thank you. Pausing here, says the guy who crushes religious orders. the contemplative orders. But of course, his instructions to religious have always been, go out and make a mess. And contemplative orders, rather famously, spend most of their time praying. They do the work required to maintain where they live and to do the work to support themselves. The church requires all religious to do some kind of work to support themselves. This is why if you go to a monastery or a convent, there's usually a gift store there, or you can buy, chocolate truffles from, I can't remember the name of them. There's a group of the only male religious order of a traditionally women's order out in like rural Oregon that makes some of the best chocolate truffles you'll ever have in your life. I've been to their monastery, tiny little group. But they spend most of their time working and praying, but they also make a lot of things to support themselves. It's why there's a Carmelite group that got into some trouble when a now defunct Catholic media organization went after them, based out of Wyoming, who are mostly ranchers, but they also sell coffee. The mystic monks. This is why they do the things they do. They have to support themselves. But a lot of times they just spend their time cloistered away praying and among themselves praying and working. Ora et labora, right? But nothing he says here is explicitly wrong. But he is the guy who crushes the more contemplative orders for being too traditional. Bear that in mind when he's talking sisters up here. In the past, little was invested in this area, far less than the formation of the clergy. It is true, since sisters and other women are thought to be second-class citizens. They are thought of like this. Do not forget that since the time of the Garden of Eden, they have been in charge. Women are in charge. Yet the need for sisters to pursue continuing education and training is urgent. Their work at the boundaries and the peripheries and among the poor requires training and competence. I would ask you to keep in mind, too, that the mission of sisters is to serve the least among us. It is not to be servants to anyone. This must stop, and you as the foundation are helping to bring the church out of this clerical mindset. I laugh because he's saying this is a positive thing. Do not forget that since the time of the Garden of Eden, women, have been in charge. Women are in charge. The church is patriarchal in a right ordered sense to its core. Okay? It just is. Men and women are complementary. The father is the head of the household. This basic stuff, basic Catholic stuff. That does not mean he's a dictator. But this is, this they're in charge stuff is just not Catholic. It's not Catholicism. This is some sort of secularized Catholicism that he's trying to push on you. Yet I should add something else. Often we hear complaints that there are not enough sisters in position of responsibility, especially after you crush their orders, Francis, in dioceses, the Roman Curia, and universities. It is true. This is true enough. We need to overcome a clerical and macho mindset. Thanks be to God that now in the Curia we have a Roman prefect and a dicastery of religious. More on that in a second. We have a woman vice governor of the Vatican State who will become governor in March. We have 3 sisters in the group that chooses bishops. They also vote. We have the undersecretary of Archbishop Pitronetti at APSA, a sister with 2 degrees in finance. Thanks be to God that the sisters are stepping forward. They know how to do things better than men. Really, this is how it is, since women and the sisters have the capacity to do things. I also hear bishops say, I would like to appoint nuns in some diocesan offices, but the superiors will not release them. No, please release them. So I would say to superiors, be generous, cultivate a vision of the universal church and of a mission that goes beyond the confines of your institute. And he goes on to thank these people for their work. Now, if you've read reports about the state of the church and the crisis in the church as it unfolded in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, women religious orders were like at the center of it, including like allegedly Wicca being practiced by some women religious orders. And the ones that did it would never surprise you, because the less like nuns they looked, the more likely they were to be engaging in all kinds of errors, including James Martin stuff and all sorts of other bizarro world things. These will not be your traditional religious that are taking these positions. I'm just telling you right now, that is not how it's going to play out. So this all comes on hot off the heels of Francis naming another woman, this time a nun named Sister Raffaella Petrina, as president of the government of the Vatican City State, replacing Cardinal Verges Alzaga. Now, that's a nun who's now going to be doing the job traditionally given to a cardinal. This is an inversion of the hierarchy of the church because cardinals are on the hierarchy higher up than the religious are. This would be basically as disordered if it was just a monk doing it who was not a priest or a bishop. This is synodality. Out of the synod on synodality, they were explicitly talking about increasing the role of women in the church and the governance of the church, and increasing the role of laity. If you're going to increase the role of laity, increase the role of women in the church, then there's that step in between, and that's where you're going to get the religious coming in to do things like govern Vatican City, right? So Francis announces, again, the appointment of Sister Raffaella Petrini as president of the government of Vatican City, replacing Cardinal Verghese Alzaga. The appointment will take effect in March, as reported by Ratticelli among many places, but we're going to go to Info Vaticana for the actual story. The headline, the Pope announces that a woman, Sister Raffaella Petrini, will replace Cardinal Verghese as president of the government of the Vatican City State. She's actually in a habit. I think that's kind of a modern habit, but could just be a picture that doesn't give a really good angle on it. But she's going to be the one who's running the Vatican, at least in like day-to-day operations, right? This is a little different than the Camerlengo. This is a big deal. And he is being praised, of course, for tossing out norms for the church and the church's long-held patriarchal standards in order to appease this materialist, let's build a better world ideology that he is part and parcel of. It says Pope Francis, continuing his pontificate of gestures, has already decided who will replace the Spanish cardinal at the head of the government of the Vatican State. The pontiff announced in an interview on Italian television that it will be a woman, Sister Raffaella Petrini, until now General Secretary of the government of Vatican City since November 2021, who will occupy this position. After appointing the first female prefect of a dicastery of the Roman Curia a couple of weeks ago, which, by the way, as I reported at that time, canon lawyer says is illegal. He doesn't have the authority to do that because he doesn't have the authority to change the truths of the faith. Pope Francis continues to appoint women to high-ranking positions in the Vatican with the aim of seeking if, with this type of appointment, he can satisfy those who call for a greater role for women in the church, who ultimately seek to be on equal footing with men and achieve a female priesthood. In other words, he's trying to appease the women's ordination group by giving them governing authority. But that's not going to work. That is not how you get them to be happy. The only way he can make them happy is to do the one thing that he has said he can't do, which is to ordain women. Instead, what you're doing is giving ground to them. We already do all these things now that priests do, except offering the Mass. So you should just let us become deacons and then become priests and then become bishops. And of course, eventually we'll finally make the Pope Joan myth a reality. That's what they want. For this reason, after the first female prefect, now comes the first woman who will become president of the government of Vatican City State. So who's the sister? The Pope has chosen an Italian Franciscan nun with a degree in political science as his future governor. Lord help us. I have degrees in political science. Okay. This Italian nun has been working with Fernando Verghese as the General Secretary of the Vatican State since November 2021. She will take on this role at just 56 years of age, so it's likely that we will have Sister Raffaella Petrini around for a while. Petrini belongs to the Congregation of Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist. She holds a degree in political science from the Free International University of Guido Carli and a PhD from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, where she is a professor of welfare economics and sociology of economic processes. She's also a member of the dicastery for bishops and of the administration of the patrimony of the Holy or the Apostolic See. Okay, so you have a welfare economics and sociology of economic processes professor. I'm very familiar with people like this. These were the people who, when I was in graduate school working on my own PhD, these are the kinds of professors that I would have reached out to for some of my own research for pointers. And it was one of these kind of professors that, this is going to sound tangential, but it's related. I was doing research for something where it became obvious when I was looking at the food stamp program in the United States that the food stamp program was a subsidy for big agriculture and for processed food. And so I emailed some sociology professors who had done some research on that kind of thing. And the responses I got from them were vitriolic. They were completely offended at the idea that something that helps the poor could actually have a less than noble purpose behind it. And that was the kind of people that reminds me of. That it was because it was the fields that they were in, or the American equivalents of. And that's who we have now running the Vatican City State. Again, the women are in charge, Francis tells us. The women are in charge. And this is a wonderful and holy and noble thing. And I got to tell you, this is the story that's been bubbling up. And I get the feeling that 2025, we're going to see a lot more of this, because we are now in basically about to enter this is the final full week of January. Almost, well, sort of. Next week's the final week of January. And we had two of these stories already in 2025. Two stories in 2025 of women religious being put in charge of Vatican prefectures, Vatican congregations. And they are not canonically supposed to be there. Canon lawyers have been speaking up about this. So he says, well, we'll have her there for a long time, probably 10, 11 years, unless the next pope is somebody reasonably orthodox who quietly removes them and puts a cardinal back in their place. But of course, the cardinals in the church these days are men cut from the same cloth as Francis. He has replaced 80% of them, with more coming this year. Chesterton's Jess says, my dad made banners for our church during the 70s and was always a woman who functioned as the art director. Yeah, in the 70s, one of the stereotypes about the Catholic Church in the 70s was that the felt banner thing, right? Gone mostly now, but you'll find parishes with older priests in them from that period who still use them. Honestly, if you're a reasonably moderate to conservative Catholic or traditionalist and you're looking to go to confession and you walk into a parish with that, a lot of people just turn around and leave because they're not even sure they're going to get a valid confession on a lot of those priests. Traditionalist Catholics, as liberal academics in the 60s told LBJ that the great society reforms they were pushing would wind up having people depend on the government. And LBJ had an entirely too spicy for YouTube and basic decency response to that. There's a famous quote of his that I wouldn't bring myself to say, but even in private company, but it was along the lines that he would have a certain segment of the population voting for his party for 400 years or something. Was grotesque, based entirely on the Great Society programs. But it was the same kind of people that we're talking about here, the same kind of professors. You don't generally go and become a PhD in those kind of fields, those specific kinds of fields, if you are if you're coming from a more traditional mindset on how to reform them and make them actually more in keeping with human dignity, to sacrifice the power of the state, to give the power back to churches and to local action groups, Catholic Action and those kinds of groups, or even individual charity. You're not doing that work as a professor and that kind of thing. You are looking for more state-centered solutions, or worse than state-centered, multi-state solutions to things. Yeah, so that is what we're doing here in the church in 2025. Is Francis is the characteristic of the ape of the church. I said we'll have a James Martin face. Well, it's also going to have a nuns on the bus face to it, you could say. If you're familiar with the nuns on the bus, these are generally pantsuit wearing nuns in the United States who tend to disappear until elections come, and then they get on their bus and they start doing tours to get you to go vote for Democrats. That's what they do. I remember right after I moved out of Portland, Oregon, the nuns on the bus showed up at my alma mater in Portland. That's what they did. They showed up there to try to whip up votes. I mean, that's what they do. And that's what is going to be the end result of these. Because the thing about it is, traditionally minded nuns don't want to run Vatican dicasteries. They don't want to run anything beyond maybe the congresses that govern, like all the Carmelites or whatever, because that's just nuns governing nuns. They don't want to go. They don't want to run the church because they understand that that's not their place. All right, folks. If there's any final thoughts in the chat, please get them in. Please pray for the sisters involved in this, that they do the best job possible with the task that's been dropped on them, or that they mistakenly took, that they don't help drive the church further down the road of the institution of the church, the human element of the church, further down the road of error. And as always, in general, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.